The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome to a special edition of Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Secretary of Technology Karen Jackson with us today. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
I noticed in the governor's State of the Commonwealth address, he announced two very positive things. One is a cyber operations squadron at Langley Air Force Base. The other is a new Visa state-of-the-art cyber fusion center in Northern Virginia. Of course, one is through the Department of Defense, one is through a private entity, and that kind of highlights the need for the state to pursue the new Virginia economy.
Woody, cybersecurity is such a pervasive topic. We're dealing with it on the defense side, we're dealing with it on the public safety side, we deal with it with our own infrastructure, as well as great opportunities like you saw with the Virginia Fusion Center up at Visa. We are working across every sector to really push Virginia ahead as a cybersecurity leader. The governor's been committed to that since his day one in office. We've stood up the Cybersecurity Commission, and that group has been working for almost 2 years, really trying to propel Virginia's policies, our actions, our higher ed institutions into a more proactive stance toward creating the new Virginia economy in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is going to be a foundation of that economy, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that it's going forward as quickly as it possibly can.
Talk to us about some of the challenges with the internet, cybersecurity, because we've all seen, of course, was it last year that there were breaches with the federal government? There's been the Anthem breach. There have been other private and governmental entities. What are the real challenges there?
Woody, it's one of those, it's a challenge and an opportunity all at one. I think the biggest challenge is that it touches each one of our lives in such a personal way. Our tax returns, our Social Security information, our employment history, as you mentioned with OPM, that was fingerprints and background checks and a lot of information that, normally people wouldn't like to have out in the open. And I think that's why it's so difficult to defend, is because it's up to each and every individual citizen to be as safe as they can be, to be as attentive as they can be, to not click on emails that don't come from somebody that they know or aren't something that they recognize, because you can set off quite an attack with just one person clicking on one bad email. And so that's why it's so pervasive. We have about 100,000 employees that we secure on the state network every day. And so we are really only one click away from having a major issue. And that's a very daunting fact when you try to figure out how you defend. Of course, we put up as many defenses as we can on that network, but it's the human element that makes cybersecurity so challenging.
And it's an ever-changing environment. You come up with a solution where there's been a breach, but just a few days later, there may be the necessity for another patch.
It is ever-changing. Hackers are quite the wily bunch. They're always moving ahead, and governments, in large part, don't move as necessarily as quickly as some folks in the private sector. We're slower to adapt. We're slower to have change, even of patching and things like that. We don't move at the rate of the private sector. And so that makes it a little bit harder for us to keep up. One of the things that's proposed in the governor's budget is something called an Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, or an ISAL, which really is meant to be the catalyst for threat information sharing between the private sector as well as the public sector. There's some of this that already goes on at the federal level, but really these attacks are local. And so if I'm seeing something on my network in Virginia, chances are you might be seeing it too, even if we're in two completely different industries. So what we want to do is stand up this organization. Virginia was the first state to step out and say we are an information sharing and analysis organization. Now it's time for us to really have those conversations about what that means and start to exchange data so that we can better defend just what you said. As things move, we want to be able to know what, not from a policing standpoint, but from an informational standpoint, to be able to know what you're seeing in terms of potential threats on your network so that we can start to defend against them earlier. Because the value of the hack is how many people a hacker can attack with the same malware or the same attack. The quicker we can stop that, the harder it is for the hackers to do what they do.
So what are some of the fundamental things that an average citizen can do in order to avoid a breach, a personal breach?
A lot of it seems like pretty basic common sense, but we find that people, when they get online, have a little bit more freewheeling attitude toward what they do, what they post. So it goes back to the simplest thing of passwords. You know, keep your passwords complicated. Don't post them on Post-it notes on your monitor. Don't, share them with your friends. Be very choosy, even on social media. And this is especially for the kids, for the younger
Right.
adults. Be very choosy about what you post, because your digital life stays with you forever. It never goes away. And so you have to always look at it as anything that I'm putting online, can I afford to lose it if somebody hacks me? Can I afford for somebody else to have it and potentially use it in a way that I don't see right now? And am I willing to potentially have it affect me in the long run in an employment situation? But it's really common sense about not putting information on sites that you don't know. If an email comes in and it looks suspect, if there's some prince from a foreign land offering you $1 million in return for, a cashier's check, it's probably not the smartest idea to click on that email and send the check. And so some of it is just basic. We call it cyber hygiene, which is a bit of an awkward term, but it really is about making sure that your passwords are up to date, making sure they're not something that's easily guessable, not using sites that aren't familiar and aren't something that you're used to dealing with. So stepping outside of your comfort zone online is usually not a good thing to do if you're involving credit card numbers, if you're involving personal information. Just be very selective with who you share that with, just like you would in the physical world. It's all about just being aware and really making sure that, the information that you give out is to somebody that you trust.
And I take it that the proliferation of mobile devices just exacerbates the problem, especially with the younger generation.
It does. And we tend to use password keepers because we now have so many passwords because we're on so many sites. And we tend to, just be much more freewheeling now that everything is mobile. And it does. It makes things much harder. The more devices that you're connected to, the more opportunities for people to be able to get into those devices and do you ill. And so it's just a matter of making sure that whatever you do, wherever you do it, device independent, that you do it as smartly as you possibly can.
Are there any programs at the K through 12 high school level to educate youngsters about the pros and cons of the use of their devices, especially in terms of the internet and security?
We're really working on trying to push the cybersecurity education as far down the educational chain as we possibly can. There are some courses out there. A lot of the awareness comes at home. Parents working with their kids to make sure that they are following good protocols and making sure passwords are up to date and that sort of thing. But really in the school systems, we're trying to teach cyber awareness, not only from the safety side, but also from a career side, because we want to make sure that kids know that they have an opportunity to go into cybersecurity as a career opportunity as well. Last summer, thanks to a little bit of funding that the General Assembly and the governor gave us last year, James Madison University actually hosted a boot camp for teachers so that the teachers can become more aware of how to teach cybersecurity and how to present opportunities in cybersecurity as a career. And so we're working very hard to make sure that our educators, our guidance counselors, as well as our children, get the message that, it is very important to be safe online, to be, we have a lot of work by the Attorney General and the Virginia State Police on crimes against children and making sure that our kids are safe online. But we also want to make sure that they understand that they have a career path in cybersecurity as well. So we're working on both tracks.
Now, what about encouraging more women to get involved in technology?
Oh, that's been an uphill battle for a long time. We talk a lot about STEM, science, technology,
Right.
engineering, math. And I think for women, it's just a matter of awareness at an early enough age that they catch the passion. I mean, if you look around, there's a lot of women in technology. Women, NASA's astronaut class, I believe it was 2015, 50% were women. Everybody marveled at that. Well, it shouldn't be that we marvel at that. We should say, well, why was there only half of them? It should have been, all of them should have been women. But I think it's finding the right role models. I think it's finding people that have the passion and can let kids, whether they be male, female, really get their hands on to something and try it. It's one thing to learn about something from a book, but it's really catching that spark when you can get your hands into a problem or you can get your hands on a keyboard and actually experience it. So we need to do a better job of making sure that girls have that opportunity early enough so that they don't lose and become afraid of science and technology and math as they get into their later years in education.
So how did you catch that spark?
I'm very fortunate that my parents would allow me to try pretty much anything I wanted to try. My mom was a NASA programmer. She worked at NASA for more than 30 years. My dad was an entrepreneur and ran a family hardware business, but was very adept with his hands. And so I had the chance to try both worlds. And I think the job that I have right now allows me to really roll the entrepreneurial spirit that I learned from my dad and the creativity from him with the technology that I was exposed to growing up. NASA Langley was my playground. And it was long before 9/11, so the security was a little bit different. But I didn't ever grow up fearing it because it had always been around in my lifetime. I saw women that had done very well as mathematicians and programmers, so it didn't seem foreign to me. And I think we need to give girls more opportunities to have those immersive experiences so they can see it's not scary. It's something that you can do, and if you develop a passion for it, can offer you some very, very good life experiences along the way.
Tell us a little bit about the creation, role, and objective of the Cybersecurity Commission in the Commonwealth.
Woody, that has been one of the best pieces of executive action, I think, that the governor took very, very early on, to bring together a group of cyber experts from throughout Virginia, from a very different set of backgrounds, put them around a table and ask them what we need to do to really further Virginia's activities in cybersecurity. We have 5 individual work groups. One is on public awareness, which we talked a little bit about. One is on economic development. One is on workforce and education. One is actually on cyber crimes, because we do have to make sure that these bad actors are punished for what they do. And then we also have another one that's on infrastructure, which helps us look at what are we doing internally, what are we doing in terms of critical infrastructure. The Commonwealth rides on a lot of public infrastructure, whether it's telecommunications infrastructure, electric infrastructure. And so we need to make sure that that infrastructure is as secure as it can possibly be. So having them to be able to advise us and to be able to give us guidance. One of the unique things about that commission is a lot of commissions take time and they spend a year studying something, then they read a report, and then they act. We chose not to take that approach. Richard Clark, who was a counterterrorism advisor to a number of presidents, is my co-chair. And so we opted to really hit the ground running. And so right from the beginning, the commission recommended that Virginia become the first state to adopt the NIST cybersecurity framework. We did that. We were the first state to become the ISAL, which we talked a little bit about for information sharing. We were the first state to step out and take executive action, the governor was, on consumer transactions safety in the Commonwealth. And so they've allowed us to have insight and maneuverability in topics that if you don't have that kind of group assembled, it would be very difficult for someone sitting inside government to see those recommendations and make them quickly enough to be able to act. And so they have been just an absolute wealth of benefit to us. We've had pieces of legislation passed last year. We have legislation that's moving through, as well as budget that's moving through the legislature right now, all of which is supported by the commission. It was the brainchild of the commission and ties back to the reports that they've written. So it's very nice to have a substantive, demonstrative backup for those requests that you're taking before the Assembly.
There are a couple of concepts I wanted you to talk to us about. One is called big data. The other one is called open data.
Okay. Data analytics is a term that encompasses both of those. We have so much data. The world is full of data. You think about the number of photos that get uploaded on a daily basis, the amount of information that's just generated by you personally on Facebook or me personally by what I do in my digital footprint. All of that generates data. Our agencies are flush with data. And so big data is really taking a look at how we assemble all of that data, how do we compare it, how do we align it so that we can make efficient and effective empirical decisions about how to improve citizen services. So it really is about taking the data that is generated on a daily basis and finding ways that our agencies can use it, can mine it, and can solve problems that otherwise, we would have always gone in with some anecdotal information and say, we think, we see, we believe. Now we can actually say the data proves. And so we're working very, very hard on, there's a lot of bumps in the road when you start talking about sharing of data. Because there's personally identifiable information involved. So there's a lot of rules and laws that govern how data can be shared. And so we're working through that process right now, and we're really trying to find ways. Our Health and Human Services folks have done a great job. Some other agencies are really DMV, getting their feet wet with big data. But we know there's a lot more we can do in that space. Open data, on the other hand, is the data that we make available to the public. And so those are data sets that typically are not, they're not typically, they have no personally identifiable information in them. They're pieces of information that we feel and we have scrubbed and we have blessed that can be in the open domain without doing any harm to anyone. Information on food availability and communities and census data, that's the sort of thing that you find in an open data format. But it has a lot of power. We've done 2 internal datathons with our agencies, and where we brought just teams together and said, here's data. Go figure out what you can do with it. The team from VDOT actually won the cup that we did with our Commonwealth IT symposium that we do every year in September. We had a big challenge there. And they actually won based on work that they had done around food deserts and food availability. So a team from VDOT working on food availability. So it gives our agency folks the ability to be more creative, to look at problems outside of their normal footprint, and really to bring some very, very creative solutions that we can put into play long term. So we're slowly coming online. It's a big undertaking, both on the open side to make sure that we're only putting the right things out there, but on the big data side as well, because it does hold a lot of promise for us long term.
You mentioned privacy concerns, especially in terms of personally identifiable information. It's interesting because people seem to be less suspicious of Facebook, if you will, than they are of our government now. They're really suspicious of government. What kinds of safeguards exist for citizens in terms of the kind of information that is accumulated about them by government?
Well, I'm not going to give you the secret sauce of how we protect it.
Right.
Then it wouldn't be nearly as safe as it is before I said it. But we go to strong lengths. The governor has put out an executive directive several months back to have us inventory all of the personally identifiable information in the Commonwealth so that we know where it is, we know who owns it, we know how it's secured. And in places where we didn't feel like that it was adequately secured, we can take measures to fix that, and we are taking measures to fix that. Encryption obviously is a big deal. We're moving a lot of our activities, everyone is, into more encrypted formats. But we spend a lot of time discussing how to protect personally identifiable information. We're entrusted with volumes of that by our citizens. And so everything that government does with citizens is based on a trust relationship. And so we we hold that as a very, very sacred trust that we have with our citizens, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that it is protected and not shared. I mean, that goes back to the
Right.
big data conversation. We want to make sure that we're not just putting data out for the sake of saying that we're doing something in data analytics. We want to make sure that that data that is specifically identifiable to one of our citizens is held back and is protected in a way that not anybody is going to be able to access that without permission.
Now, what new technologies are available now for members of the General Assembly that weren't available, let's say, 10 years ago?
Oh, wow. That's a pretty broad
It
list.
is.
We actually, the legislative branch does their own IT, and so we're supportive. We share some telecommunications platforms and that sort of thing. I think the biggest evolution over there is it's really iPads. You see the mobile devices. You see people going onto the floor now with laptops and mobile devices and iPads, and so their ability to do research on the floor. Before you would have to get an aide, get them to go research it, come back, potentially go into law books that were somewhere in another room in the Capitol or General Assembly building. And now they can do their own research on the floor. They can look up items. They can look up other bills. They can communicate with other members. And so it's really transforming the way that they're able to conduct business while they're in session.
And I guess just like everyone else, smartphones are state of the art now versus a BlackBerry, for example.
Right. There are still a few of us who handle BlackBerries and keep our BlackBerries close at hand, mainly for transparency reasons. But the smartphones, the power of those are the equivalent of computers 15 years ago. They have more memory, they have more capabilities, they have more functionality, they've connected to this thing called the internet that really wasn't pervasive in private life 20 years ago. And so it's offering a myriad. You can do everything that you can do on an iPad or a PC basically on your smart device. And so for transparency, for the availability of, as we were talking, research and other activities right on the floor, it's opened up a lot of opportunities for them to be much more engaged with their constituents, with each other, and really to be more informed as they're making decisions.
Now, part of the promise of all these new technologies was that we were going to have less paperwork. Have you seen that?
I think anyone that would walk into my office would say I have not mastered the paperless office at this point. I think there's always going to be, documentation and things that will require paper. As we evolve through really credentialing online and being able to do contracting online, those will get better. When I purchased my house, I signed most of the documents through online signatures. The technologies are out there. I think it's going to take a while for that comfort level to really build to a point where we could possibly go completely paperless. But I think we're still a few years off because we older generations
Yes.
tend to like to have things that we can see and touch and feel. So it's getting there, but as I said, my office is not a testament to being paperless at this point.
We were talking before we began the interview, the impact of technology, especially in terms of autonomous vehicles. We talked about how just recently some members of the General Assembly and even yourself and some staff members have been able to take advantage of driving or not driving those vehicles,
Right.
so to speak. Talk to us about that technology.
Oh, that's one of the most exciting industries that's coming of age in Virginia. Unmanned systems, autonomous systems, whether they're in the air, on the land, or on the water, or under the water, hold such promise. Hampton Roads has really been in the autonomy space for a very long time because of the military. Obviously, with sequestration and a lot of the changes that we've seen in that environment, really the focus is moving to try to figure out how to transfer some of those autonomous technologies into the private sector. Virginia Tech has the Virginia Transportation Institute. They're also home to one of the 6 FAA test sites with the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership. And so we are seeing unmanned aerial systems, drones, in conversations now that are much more positive than what we were hearing 5 years ago when it was all about the military using them in theater Now you hear people talking about their activities in potential package delivery. Last July, Virginia was the home to the nation's first FAA-sanctioned humanitarian package delivery. So at the Rural Area Medical Clinic in Wise County, Virginia, a company called Flirty, along with a whole host of others, including NASA Langley, actually made the nation's first package delivery by drone.
Wow.
And so it was a Kitty Hawk moment as the way it was billed, and really gained worldwide acclaim for the fact that we were the first place in the nation to be able to do that. It's really an ubiquitous platform, whether you're trying to do autonomy in a car or a drone or in a boat or an underwater vehicle. You have sensors. You need to seek and avoid. You need to be able to control it through networks. The networks need to be secure. So cybersecurity plays a large role in these autonomous vehicles across the platforms. So we really are working hard. The autonomous cars, as we talked about, the adoption of those, people you think would be a little more standoffish, but really people have migrated to and accepted quite well the self-parking cars. And having had the opportunity to experience the autonomy really is having an opportunity to get your hands off the wheel. It does take a moment or two to realize that the car is fully in control, but the computer does quite well. It picks right up where you leave off, and if it gets into a situation where it needs you to take back over, it lets you know that, and you take back over, and it's seamless. Not a lot different than something like cruise control. That was foreign to us when we started using it at the beginning. Oh, we're not sure we can take our foot off the gas pedal. It's going to take time, but I think a lot more people are ready given the transportation situation and congestion that we have on some of our roads and the nation has, globally on their roads. It would be nice to allow the car to be able to do some of the driving for us in those situations.
We got about 30 seconds left,
Sure.
but there is a structure out by Dulles. It's an upside-down pyramid. I think it's the Center for Innovative Technology.
Right.
What's that all about?
Center for Innovative Technology is one of my two agencies, along with Virginia Information Technologies Agency. They're working very hard to grow the next generation of entrepreneurs in technology for the Commonwealth, as well as accelerate the growth of cybersecurity companies through Mach 37. They're also responsible for working on connecting broadband into the Commonwealth's rural areas, and they've been working on that topic for a really long time. So it's a very eclectic building, and they have a pretty eclectic portfolio, but they're working very hard to make sure that Virginia not only has the connectivity it needs to support students and commerce and all those things, but also has a new crop of entrepreneurs out there that are really going to serve as a cornerstone for the new Virginia economy.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, Karen Jackson, Secretary of Technology. Thank you for watching this special edition of Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.